Hi and welcome or welcome back to the Books for Everywhere. So today I am here with my November wrap up. We are almost at the end of the month and I am still reading one of these books. However, I wanted to get this one done while we still have some light, although it is getting dark right now. So this is a little bit of a race against the clock. Hopefully it doesn't get dark while I'm filming, but let's dive right into the books that I read in November. I haven't actually counted how many books I read in November. Let me just count. So I read 11 books in November, which is definitely not the most books I've read in a month. That might actually be one of my lower months, but I'm still pretty happy with 11 books. I feel like that is a pretty good amount, and I did read some big ones, and I got through some of the TBR that I wanted to get through, and some books that I just wanted to read in the festive season, and I did a lot of buddy reads as well. So I'm pretty happy with the way the month went. But yeah, let's dive into the books that I actually read in the month of November. So the first one is Kingdom of the Curse by Carrie Maniscalco. This one is, surprise surprise, a buddy read that I did with my friends Amy and Joe. Me and Amy reread Kingdom of the Wicked and then went straight into Kingdom of the Curse, which was such a good idea. I would highly recommend it if you don't really remember what happened in Kingdom of the Wicked, especially the ending, because it does go straight into Kingdom of the Cursed. But basically, the first book, Kingdom of the Wicked, follows our main character, who I've completely forgotten the name of, but oh well. So it follows her as she finds out that her twin sister has gone missing and has actually been murdered. And then she finds out that her twin sister, I think is called Amelia, that's what her name is. Amelia and Victoria. So her twin sister has gone missing, ended up being murdered, and basically she finds out that Victoria has been trying to contact these demons. I think there's 7 of them and they're from kind of the underworld, and she's been trying to contact them. I have not said that Amelia and Victoria are witches, but they're witches. So to find out what happened to her twin sister, Amelia also ends up contacting these demons, and the story kind of goes from there. She has a lot of contact with Wrath, who is one of the demons, but yeah, so it kind of goes from there. And it is really, really interesting. If you are looking for something that's a little bit different, witchy, and with romance, I would really, really recommend it, especially when we get to Kingdom of the Cursed. It is very spicy, it's a completely different kind of setting, and we are in a much more fantasy setting, which I really, really enjoyed, and there is a more romance-focused plotline, which I think was done really well. There was a few critiques I had, but I did really enjoy it, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the next one I read was also a buddy read with Alex, and that was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I've been reading a lot of Jane Austen books on audio, and this one was no different. I picked this one on audio as well, and I did really enjoy the audiobook. I can only say that it did lose me a little bit in the middle, but I feel like that is probably more me than the book. But I really, really liked the beginning and the ending. As always, I really liked the settings of Jane Austen books, and I really liked this story as a whole. I feel like I don't really need to explain too much about this one because it is a very, very famous Jane Austen book, probably Jane Austen's most famous, and one of the last ones I had to read. Me and Alex also watched the film, the 2005 film adaptation for this one, which I also really, really enjoyed, and I'm glad I finally read this one. As I said, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I then read Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin, which was a reread for me, and I have these fake rate dust jackets on at the moment, which I absolutely love. But anyway, I buddy read this one with Alex as well. I read this one mostly on audiobook, if not all on audiobook. I think I just read the last 30 pages in physical format to finish it off, but I reread this one on audiobook, and I have to say I absolutely loved it. I read this for the first time last year, and it was my second favourite book of 2020, just closely pipped to the post by Addie LaRue. But I did really enjoy this one. I gave it 5 stars the first time. I just about gave it 5 stars this time. I did still really, really enjoy this book on a reread. This one follows Lou and Reed. Lou is a witch and Reed is a witch hunter, and their lives become intertwined and they end up actually getting married, or kind of being forced to get married, and it is really, really interesting. I love that kind of enemies to lovers dynamic, and it's done really, really well. I also love the setting in this one. It makes me think of medieval Paris. That's the kind of like vibe I am picturing, and there is a lot about the setting that I absolutely love, and the romance, I just absolutely love these two so much. It is what I love about this series, although there is a lot more going on behind the scenes with Lou being a witch, and there is a lot of kind of power dynamic stuff going on there which becomes more prevalent in the later books. My favourite aspect of this series is definitely the romance, and I would highly recommend the audiobooks. It has multiple narrators and I felt like it's done really well, so I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. And while we're here, I also read Blood and Honey, which is the second book, which also has this fake rate dust jacket on. These are the Fairy Loot editions with fake rate dust jackets on. But yeah, this is Blood and Honey, which is the second book in the Serpent and Dove series. There's its normal cover, and again, I really enjoyed this one. However, it did lose me a little bit. I think I gave this one 4 stars out of 5 because this one is a lot less focused on the romance. It does have a found family aspect which I really like, but it picks up more on the action plot of the first one, which is kind of more of a subplot, and becomes the kind of prominent plot of the second one. As I said, I really liked the found family aspect of this, and I did really like the action. It was very, very fast paced, and I feel like you are kind of thrown into the action straight away, and it doesn't really leave for the entire book. Again, I read this one mostly on audiobook, but I did read a little bit in physical format as well. So the only thing I will say about this one is it is very, very different to Serpent and Dove, and I think that is why people tend to not like it as much as Serpent and Dove. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. However, I think a lot of it is like expectation level. I feel like Shelby McEwen does struggle to kind of pace the romance over the 3 books, and therefore it doesn't work as well in this one, and I felt like it was missing something that the first one had. However, it is just a very different story. I feel like going into the series with that expectation would have helped, but yeah, I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. I also read A Sky Painted Gold by Laura Wood, which, you guessed it, was part of a buddy read I did with multiple people, and I really, really enjoyed this one. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is a Great Gatsby inspired kind of retelling, and I really, really loved it. This one also follows somebody called Lou, and I was reading it at the same time as Serpent and Dove, so it got a little bit confusing, but she lives in Cornwall and it's 1929, yes, and she ends up in this old house on an island, kind of, that you can get to at certain points in the day, and she ends up on there, and she basically breaks into this house because it's empty, and one day the owners of this house come back, and it ends up being a very, very grand house, and these people are quite wealthy and posh, or they seem to be anyway, and Lou ends up being swept into this kind of whirlwind lifestyle. I can definitely see where the inspiration came from with Gatsby, and I'm glad that I only read it earlier this year so I could see that direct inspiration, and I found that really, really interesting to read. I also loved the characters, and I loved how this one tackled some really important issues, especially because it's set in the 1920s. It talked a lot about being a woman in the 1920s and what that means for you and what kind of expectations people have. Also talked a little bit about racism, which I found really interesting, but it didn't like completely blow me away. I did really, really enjoy it, but I did feel that the narrator was a little bit young, or also like modern. Like, I feel like the writing was a little bit modern for the time period, if that makes sense, and sometimes it kind of threw me a little bit, and it also felt a little bit young. However, I did really enjoy a lot about this book, and as I said, I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I then read Last Chance Books by Kelsey Rodkey, and I read this one on audiobook as well, and this was another one that I really enjoyed. This one was on my TBR as my lowest rated book, which I picked out as a prompt on my November TBR game, Mini Golf TBR, and I was a little bit shocked to see this one was my lowest rated. However, I have heard mixed things about this book, but I wouldn't say it's my lowest rated at all. I actually quite enjoyed this book. It is apparently not inspired by You've Got Mail, so I'm sorry if I've said that in previous videos, but I saw a thing on Goodreads saying that the author hadn't actually seen You've Got Mail before she finished writing this book, but the story is kind of really, really similar, and this one actually inspired me to finally watch You've Got Mail, which I'd never seen before, which I really enjoyed. But this one is very similar in the sense that there is a small independently run bookstore, and then a big chain bookstore moves in across the street. However, these two characters have a crush on each other. One of them works at the independently owned bookstore and is trying to save it, whereas the other one is working at the big chain bookstore. And there's kind of like a hate to love romance, which I really enjoyed. I found this one really fun. The audiobook was really, really good, and it was just really entertaining. It was nothing incredible. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, I think. Nothing amazing, but if you want like a light-hearted book, I would definitely recommend it. There was a lot to love about it, and yeah, I would recommend it if you're looking for something like this, if it sounds like something you'll enjoy. I feel like there is a lot to love about this. It also talks a lot about kind of family drama and growing up with difficult parents or being without parents, and things like that. But there was a lot to love, there was a lot of important discussions. If this sounds like something you would enjoy, I would recommend this one. And we have yet another buddy read, which I read, the X Hex, again with Amy and Joe, and I really liked this one as well. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. This one was so much fun. Again, it was so entertaining. This is an adult romance, which is based around Vivian and Reese. Vivian actually put a curse on Reese 9 years ago when they were kind of like teenagers, young adults, and she put a curse on him. She's a witch and she lives in this small town in America, and then Reese, who's a Welsh, was living in the small town at the time, and after they broke up 9 years before, she put this curse on him accidentally, and she kind of forgotten about it ever since. And then he actually comes back to town and they realise that the curse still exists and the curse actually happened, and kind of moves far beyond Reese and into the town itself. This one was a lot of fun. I'm a bit sad that I didn't get to read it more around Halloween, but actually only came out on the 28th of October, but I'm so glad that we read this one. It was a little bit spicy, but it was also really, really funny, and the writing was so, so witty. I really enjoyed reading it. It was really easy to read as well, and I'm glad that we buddy read this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I then picked up Flora's Travelling Christmas Shop by Rebecca Raisin. This is one I've been trying to read for the entire month, but because I was reading so many other things, I was failing to get to it, and I finally put my mind to it and actually really enjoyed this book. It was a lot of fun. The writing wasn't amazing, and it did knock a star off this book, unfortunately. It is not great, and the dialogue felt very unnatural at times, which wasn't fun to read always, but there was a lot of like light, entertaining, fun parts to this book that I really enjoyed. This one follows Flora, who loses her job. She works at a Christmas shop, and she decides to actually set up her own travelling Christmas shop in this camper van that she buys, and she goes to Lapland. It is kind of far-fetched. It is a bit like a Hallmark movie, which it does kind of mention in the book, but if you are looking for something festive, it definitely got me in the festive spirit. There was a lot to love about this book. There was some stuff that wasn't so great as well, like I said with the writing. However, I really, really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun reading it, and I loved the Lapland setting, which I feel like was written really well. I really liked this community of travelling kind of shop owners that she lives in for a while in Lapland, and there was just a lot to love. I liked the love interest as well. He's kind of like a Scrooge, grumpy character that is kind of won around to Christmas, which I really liked. I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. I then picked up Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World by Benjamin Alire Sains, and I loved this book. I read the first book earlier this year. Both of these were sent to me by the publisher, so thank you to Simon & Schuster for these. However, I loved the first book. I think I rated it 4 stars. This one I actually enjoyed even more. I didn't know how it would be continued from the first book, especially because this one was written 10 years after, or it was published 10 years after Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe. But I really, really enjoyed this book. Wasn't entirely sure what to expect from it. I stuck the audiobook on, which is read by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I've been saying his name wrong as well. Lin-Manuel Miranda, and his voice suited this book so, so well. I'm so glad I listened to the audiobook, because honestly, if you're going to read the series, both books are read by him. I feel like his voice suits these so well. I would really highly recommend it. But this book is set in the late 1980s, if I remember rightly, and it's following Ari and Dante after the first book, and it kind of explores more about their relationship and where they're going with life. Again, it's a coming of age story, but a bit later on. There are some very, very difficult discussions about death and grief and also AIDS that are had in this book. I feel like the discussions are really, really well handled, very, very emotional. This book made me cry multiple times, but I really, really loved it. I felt like it was done really, really well. I feel like Benjamin has this absolutely beautiful, poetic, lyrical way of writing, which I adore, and I would highly recommend this series. This one was a real pleasant surprise because I really wasn't sure whether I wanted to read it or how I would find it, but I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I then picked up Weathering With You Volume 3. This is the last volume in the manga, and I did give this one 5 stars, although it's really, really difficult to rate this manga because I kind of rate it on how much I love the film. And Makoto Shinkai's films are some of my favourite films of all time. Your Name is definitely one of my favourite films of all time, and Weathering With You is close behind it. It isn't my favourite by him, but I do still love it a lot, and I feel like it's hard as a fan of the films to read this without some kind of bias behind it. But basically this one follows two young people who live in Tokyo, and one of them is 100% sunshine girl, and the guy has moved into Tokyo from a small island, and he starts working for a journalist as kind of an assistant and has to track down an 100% sunshine girl to do a article on, and ends up meeting Hina, I think her name is. Doesn't say on the back, but I think she's called Hina. And they end up becoming friends. She's a 100% sunshine girl, which basically means she can change the weather. So it talks a lot about sacrifice and friendship, and also kind of changing the world into something that it isn't, in a really interesting way. I feel like this one, because it is the final one, is very emotional. It has some interesting, very small conversations that I'm really glad were carried across from the film to the manga, because they're really important kind of conversations that are had between characters, which I really, really enjoyed reading. Did make me a little emotional, but again, it's really hard to rate this one because I do love the film so much, but I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book on this list, which I haven't actually finished yet, has my bookmark in it, is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. And I am loving this book so far. I think it is going to be a 5-star from me. However, I'm not enjoying it quite as much as The House in the Cerulean Sea, but we will see as we carry on with this book. But I still wanted to do this wrap up while I could, and could film this for you guys. But I'm really, really loving this book. I'm just over halfway, and it is just so heartwarming. It has that classic TJ Klune heartwarming, beautiful writing that is kind of set in the real world, kind of, but it's also not. It's like this fantastical world, and this one follows Wallace, who has just died and is basically trying to accept that he's died, and he's sent to this tea house, which is on the front of the book, this beautiful little tea house, and there he meets Hugo, who runs this tea house, and he is a ferryman who basically takes people from when they die from the real world into their afterlife and leads them through that kind of journey. And through this process, Wallace kind of discovers a lot about himself. They don't really leave the tea house in the entire book as far as I can tell, and I don't think that is really going to change in the second half that much. However, there is so much to love about this book. I'm really, really enjoying it so far. It's absolutely beautiful. It's already made me cry multiple times, and I just adore TJ Klune's writing and world building. So as I said, I'm sure I will give this 5 out of 5 stars, but I wanted to do this wrap up, and I felt I was far enough through that I could safely say I love this book. So that is all of the books that I have read and am reading in November. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I hope it wasn't too annoying that I haven't finished the last book so far, but I will definitely finish it by the end of the month. I am very, very excited for my December TBR. If you want to check out what I will be reading in December, there is a TBR video to my monthly TBR game that I do, which is where Mini Golf decides what I read in the following month. So I'll link that down below if you do want to see that. But again, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!